talk about how you're going to learn systems is to chunk the sport apart so that you can deliberately practice certain aspects. There's a definition of deliberate practice, but it's breaking down the fundamentals that are required and going out there and practicing. In that 3D model, I really believe that you kind of go out there and discover all the parts of it, of some concept, really understand it, always trying to grow more in it, looking at it from different perspectives, looking at it from an Italian perspective, looking at it from an American perspective, looking at it from a Canadian perspective, and then distill that down into, hey, what are the key points or critical critical points that each athlete may have. And that's going to be different. The key is that a learning cue or a cue that works for an athlete is going to be different for somebody else. And that's the process of coaching and working it out before you go out there and do. At Apex, where I'm working now, we've really spent a lot of time breaking down what are the basics. And this is work that's built on when I was at the US ski team and then working on from there. And we really broke down the basics, the basic fundamentals, the chunks of the sport, our fundamentals, skills, cornerstones of fast skiing, speed generation, decision-making, rhythm and timing, and sparking fun or enjoyment. At some point, it'd be great to be able to talk and chat with all of you about what's in all of those. But these are the kind of the basic areas that we've decided to really focus on. And just to give you a sense, the fundamentals, they're the 5 fundamentals that US ski team were identified within the whole staff and athletes working together. That's balanced athletic stance, outside ski, upper body stability, snow contact, pole plant. So nothing new. It's just really kind of categorizing. And I think this is important when we talk about just having a simple language, and understanding what fits where. And then this is where, a region or coaches within a coaching group can get a consistent language. And this is kind of just the titles of your book, let's just say. My goal is to help athletes become autonomous or autonomy. They have their own autonomy. The athlete ownership, that they own the process of what they're learning, that they own their struggles, they own their successes. But I want athletes that have this, this creativity, the ability to freely express themselves. And I think the whole goal is to kind of give guidelines, some kind of bumpers out there that are kind of the outer banks of where we want them to discover. And I really think that through guided discovery, the athletes learn some basic principles. And one of those principles are the basics that I just listed out before. But what we're trying to get to is an athlete that can express themselves in a creative way and have autonomy. Now, before we really can talk about learning systems, we have to understand the difference between performance and learning. Performance is observed behavior, on-demand execution of a skill learned when there's pressure. So when we go out and ski with an athlete and they get better, they're performing better at that moment, but they don't necessarily learn it. Learn it is permanent change, relative permanent change in their movement pattern or their knowledge base or their ability to apply or their ability to make good decisions. That's learning. As teachers, as coaches, that's where we are. We really should be much more focused on long-term learning than performance. We all like performing because we feel good at the end of the day. We see the kids skiing better. The kids feel like they're making progress, and that's important. But in the end of it, we put way too much importance on that and not enough importance on long-term learning. The goals of training for me, this is why we go out there and practice, is to learn to express yourself freely in high pressure situations. And this is really about adapting the 3 corners of stones of fast ski racing. And sorry to jump here, but that's one of the basics. And those are just, pressure in the fall line, shortest path to center mass, and reducing friction or drag. And in every situation, you have to adapt to whatever is in front of you. So for example, when you're racing on an icy slope on the East Coast Is reducing drag and friction the main important one, or is it shortest path to the center of mass and pressure in the fall? And which one of those is more important? Or if you're racing in panorama on the kind of moderate terrain, grippy snow, it's negative 30 degrees out. I mean, shortest path is probably less important than reducing drag. So the athlete has to adapt to those situations. So the purpose of training is to provide this opportunity for athletes to learn how to express themselves freely, but with those clear goals in mind. Some situations, it might be speed generation, which is another basic, just clearly identifying what those speed generators are: skate, pump, and swing. And more, I'm realizing that really training is about allowing the opportunity to make effective decision making. Anyways, I jumped there. So if we sit and just kind of look at a normal performance training, what we do is 90% of coaches out there, what we do is we set up a GS session, we set up a slalom session. And let's just say we know we're going to ski on, moderate terrain. So we train on moderate terrain, and we know that the normal course set is 10 to 11 meters. So we set 10 to 11 meters and we go out there and take 8 to 10 runs. That is going to help us perform better at that moment, because it helps us with our rhythm and timing. But if we think that's going to help for long-term learning of certain fundamental changes, we're crazy. And that's, unfortunately, we keep saying, oh, we stay at the bottom and we give feedback, do this, do this, do this. But the amount of change that actually happens relative to the hours being spent doing it is this. So we have to find other ways to expand their learning for the long term. And yes, you can work on performance, but at some point, fundamentals or skills, basics, are going to break down, and they can't continue to build up higher because they don't have the breadth of the base to go along. So I've drawn out this pyramid just to kind of like is a way of talking through things layer by layer. So old motor learning was the words were cognitive, associative, autonomous. In more recent literature, we've had variable practice, random practice, block practice, adaptability. These are things that are in the literature. But the goal of this is to widen out their basics. I'm going to walk through this for a little bit more detail. Typically, what we do is when we set up an environment, a GS course, let's just say we set it at 25 meters on a moderate course, and we say we're going to set tourney. We'll go through that and we'll do like 6 to 8 runs. So that would be a very blocked practice. Here's what we're looking on. We may give the skill set, hey, we want to really work on active weight transfer. We do it in a blocked environment. That environment works really good if you're trying to just focus on the rhythm and timing for that situation. But if you're trying to increase long-term learning in other skills or specific skills, it's not going to change. So what we want to do is we want to go towards a more variable environment, a more random environment to actually get the learning to stick in. And that would be, for example, setting a course at a GS course at 25 meters, but every second run, change it from very straight to very turny, maybe half the course straighter, half the course turnier. All of a sudden, those varying situations, the randomness of those situations you may create are going to make it so that the athlete has to adapt. And the adapting of the athlete is where the athlete finds new solutions and creates new learning. Yes, are they going to make a lot more mistakes? Absolutely. They're going to make a lot more mistakes, but those mistakes are where they're going to learn how to make proper decision making. I'm going really fast here through a lot of stuff, so I apologize. But now there's a time for blocked practice. There's a time for blocked practice in a very specific order. And that's when we have to do instructional. So let's just use the example of an active weight transfer. An athlete may not know what an active weight transfer is. So we say that that's an active process of moving from one foot to the other. I want to do that actively, versus passively, where it's the turning effect that transfers the weight. Many of our athletes, especially that ski on grippy snow, do a passive weight transfer. They may not know the difference. So we need to go out there and teach them an active weight transfer versus what they normally do. So that would be an instructional phase and a very blocked practice, specific skill, a specific progression, step by step, will really work really well for instruction and is actually needed for that base instruction. But once they understand what active weight transfer is and they can show that they can do it, if we continue to do it in that blocked manner, there will be very little to no transfer in a competition. That's where we have to then bring them towards random variable training. So as a coach, we have to decide that chunk that's not being done, that we've identified that needs to change in our athletes. Is it something that needs instructional, or does it need to ingrain better learning, adaptability of that learning? Once we understand that, we can design the practice appropriately. So here would be an example of a situation where an athlete's doing a very blocked practice style, learning. Is the video playing? I think the video, my internet's not fast enough to play the video. Sorry, guys. We're gonna have to skip over the videos. We'll try one more real quick here. Josh, are you able to hear me fine? Clear?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. It's just the videos too slow.
That's a bummer. I apologize, guys. I mean, I'll describe these videos. These are drills where an athlete is working on basic athletic stance is the goal. But we've identified in this athlete that he's unable to separate his femur from his pelvis and movements inside his pelvis and femur. So this is internal, external femur rotation, but the goal of athletic stance. And this is just a progression of edge sets and traverses, doing it in a 2 skis on the snow and a javelin. So this would be an example of like he needed to be instructed on this, and he needs to continually learn that motor pattern. So that would be how you would use that example of a very specific practice. So specific practice is repetition practice, skill under a constant condition. Variable practice is the variety of skills practiced within a situation. Specific practice is great for instruction. Variable practice is for long-term learning. Again, these are just videos of putting multiple skills together. You can see here is a training environment where there's a spine and GS gates. And if you look up above the hill there's some very tight brushes and stubbies mixed in. So the athletes are being exposed for a range of turn shapes in a training session. And you can see there with no poles. So that would be another way to change the environment. It was just a little, performance versus learning. When you're in the instructional phase, you can take a snapshot of this, and I'll make this presentation available to Josh and you can send it around. But it just looks at different ways of instructional phase, performance phase, learning phase, what works, what doesn't work. The main point of this is like feedback. Is how much feedback are you going to give in each situation? And in the learning phase, you're really going to give less frequent feedback, but you're going to be much more descriptive in what you're looking for. And when we bring it descriptive, we try to keep it outside of the body, and we're trying to keep it more towards the task. Are you achieving the task or not the task? When we want someone to perform better on that moment, giving them a bunch of feedback, as long as they can handle it, usually helps them. If you're into this stuff and you read about it, you're going to start to see a lot of the literature starts to call it not random variable practice. They call it low contextual interference or high contextual interference. It's the same thing. It's just maybe the more modern word that's being used in the scientific literature. But it's the same exact thing. So, an example would be is if you're learning to balance on a voodoo board, for example, high contextual interference would be People are throwing balls at you, different types of like extremely high contextual interference would be someone's throwing a football at you, a volleyball, a med ball, and a tennis ball, and you're having to catch and throw them back to you from different angles. Would be high contextual interference. Low contextual interference is you're standing on a voodoo ball by yourself, voodoo board by yourself, trying to find balance. So just a quick example. This is a video, just these next series of videos, I wish I could show them. It's just showing you that really good practice is messy at first, especially when you're introduced. The athletes they're the rhythm, the timing, it's chunky, it's slow, it's broken down. Sometimes it's fast, they're falling. Good practice is messy. It doesn't look like they're executing. You go out there and you watch the best teams prepare a football match. You go to Monday practice, Tuesday practice, Wednesday practice. It's messy. It doesn't look organized. It doesn't look like this. But the athletes are trying things. They're pushing their limits. They're going out of their comfort zone. They fall down. They get back up. They're embracing those failures as ways for them to learn. So here's just an example of Jay Poulter, one of the young development team guys in the U.S. prior to him making the team. It's a series of clips of him. You watch him skiing on one ski in slalom, falling down. It's nothing pretty. It's nothing great. But, step by step, they're learning this way. And I think so oftentimes coaches and athletes don't want to make this training messy. They're scared of it. This is just another way to look at the same thing. Okay, constraints-based method training. This is just further developing on this. Constraints method was actually developed by a Canadian group of women back in the 70s. Fantastic initial research that was done on how people learn through their environment and what they're exposed to. And as of recently, it's coming back. A lot of research is based on that same principles, and it's coming back in a really cool way. But if you constrain people in a certain way, they are going to learn to move and develop in that way. So you can change those constraints and form how people develop. And that takes time as a coach, but that's what is possible. So when we look at constraints, there are basically three basic things we have to look at. First is the individual constraint, how strong they are, their age, how heavy they are, their height, weight, but also their behavior. Are they motivated? Are they not motivated? Do they have attention span? Do they have not attention span? The reasons why they do the sport. Those are individuals. We have to work with what we've got there, and we have to identify, okay, these are the limitations that they may have. How can we adapt to those situations? The next one is, it's really the environmental constraints. And this is where ski coaches come in and play a part. How do we change the environment to adapt to where we want to go? And when we talk about environment, this is gravity, surface, pitch of the hill, side hills, those kind of environments. How we set the courses. Do we run in a mogul course, ice, those things. Everything we do, if we train always on ice, on a steep pitch, we're going to develop a certain way of skiing. If we always ski on flat and soft snow, we're going to develop a certain way of skiing. We can talk technique all we want, but that's going to lead to a certain style of skiing. So we have to use those opportunities to develop skiing. So for example, if we need to work on upper body discipline, setting really, really, really turny and very, very offset and distance where they have to stay stable. That's going to develop an athlete with great upper body discipline. But if we do that too much, then as soon as the athlete needs to go straight, they're going to counter too much. They're going to be over their outside too much. They're not going to be able to let the ski release. So we need to use the environments in that way. One big part that I really realize is really important in terms of environmental constraints is the cultural. What are the cultural norms? What is it within a club, within a team is allowed? What's the expectation? That is going to shape the athlete's development of movement very much so. Are they willing to push the limits? Are they willing to go risk failure? Or if they feel like they make a mistake, it's frowned upon. So that's going to develop how the skier throws himself or develops himself some characteristics of being aggressive or not aggressive. Do they view mistakes as an opportunity to grow, or do they view mistakes as something they should not do? That's part of your culture as a club, as a coach, as a group. That's definitely going to shape how they ski. Task constraints are really what we can do a lot of. This is, we can change the rules of the game. We can change the equipment. We can take the poles away. We can use Super G skis and GS. We can do parallels. We can do parallels on the flat. We can do skating races, skate forward, skate backwards, all these different types of things that we can do. Those are going to be a task constraint, and really is the playground of a coach. So as we communicate to the athletes, communicating what is the clear goal and the clear task of what we're trying to do is key. So communication is paramount in this whole thing. And again, I got a bunch of videos here that I can't show. And this is just looking at different tasks, constraint tasks. So using rollers with GS skis, but 15-meter GS, for example, to work on recentering in the transition. How does this all work? As we bracket, as we pull out, as we explore very tight slalom, very open slalom, tight GS, straight GS, very straight, very, very turny. The athletes have to find new solutions to accomplish the task or goal. Those solutions are what it gets ingrained into their system and is learning. Athletes learn by coach-led training, on their own training and practice. If they understand the real basics that they want to go work on, they go out there and ski it, and they're going to ingrain that learning practice. Free ski, playing on the mountain, skiing bell to bell. I think skiing bell to bell is one of the greatest learning environments you can do. Why? Because you have to learn to ski efficiently. If you're skiing on good skis, good snow, fast chairlifts from all day, all of a sudden your athletic position has to improve to be able to ski the whole day. Just some best practices when we talk about constraint-based training is really have a clear task and objective, and then set the objective, set the constraint to form to the skill you want to work on. So if it's upper lower body separation, setting really, really tight slalom, if they start to rotate their shoulders or hips, they're going to be slow. As soon as they can stabilize the upper body and do all the work with the feet, they're going to be much faster through that environment. So that's going to be upper body and lower body separation. But if it's really about upper body discipline, like I said before, really, really turning across the hill. If it's about releasing the ski down the fall line, is, set the constraint brushes so that you push the arc tighter, smaller, and release down the hill. And you actually constrain that they can't turn up the hill anymore. So it's not, I think initially when I started talking about this, people thought it was always turn, make them slow down. And I'm saying, no, you're just constraining that they can't do what they want to do normally. You're saying, no, go here. Don't be afraid, especially early season now when you're coming into your clubs, there's limited snow. You've got just a small patch of snow, using one ski, slalom ski, using Nordic skis, using skis on a skating rink. You guys all have great skating rinks up there. Go play hockey with skis on. You're going to learn stuff, how to move on your skis. So don't be afraid to do the same idea, but using other equipment as your constraints. This is just a page of just looking at logistics versus planning or content. Most of the time when you have a meeting, a team meeting is spent on logistics, and that's BS. We should be talking about content. What do we want to do? How are we going to do it? How are we going to be creative to get something done? Logistics, decide who's going to decide on how things are going to get done. Have them send an email, have them send give them 2 minutes in the meeting to recap. Here's what's going on. Boom, boom, boom. Don't spend your time on logistics. Spend your time on content, and then evaluate how your content's working out. Is the things you're putting in place working to where you want to go? That's how you're all going to get better. Share that, work on it. The last thing I'm kind of jumping through here, feedback. when we talk about feedback, there's really good science coming out now that shows that if feedback is outside of the body instead of something inside the body, so often we talk about moving a hand this way, move your knee this way, flex your ankle this way, put your hip over this. I mean, I'm as guilty as anybody doing this, but the feedback under the science shows that if you can create that same movement pattern by thinking about something outside of the body. So give the feedback, give the cue of something outside the body. So your bib, the zipper on your jacket, the ski tip, the bend of the ski. Yeah, the sky's the imagination, but if it's outside the body, and the athlete's going to find a way to do that, they're going to find their own creative way to do that. And that's going to be far more effective for them, faster for them to adapt when the pressure's on. So we sometimes use the inside of the body, the joints, to talk about what we want to see, but we have to very quickly turn that into something external. The other part of learning feedback is we have to look at our athletes and understand some of them are visual focused and some of them are feel focused. And that's to the individual athlete. And we as a coach need to learn what our athletes are and then give our cues, give our cueing in that sense. So it might be much more visual, looking ahead, looking far ahead, looking at something, or it could be feeling the snow, feeling the turn, feeling the forces, feeling the fall line, feeling the acceleration. And oftentimes a coach will be one or the other, and all their feedback will be that way. And that's why they relate to certain athletes better than others. And it's not personalities, it's how the athletes, what kind of feedback cueing works for them. Yeah, so just to wrap up, I just encourage you to bracket outside of what's normal. If you're really trying to teach skiing fundamentals of how to ski well, bracket extreme, go extreme bracketing. Because as soon as an athlete can do those things that you want them to do in those extreme ways, they're going to get themselves their fundamentals and their basic skills really in a good way. If you're looking to adapt, bracket for adapting for ski racing, just remember it's the racing side is rhythm and timing. So not going too far in the extreme is important, but still have an adaptation between slalom at 8 meters, 12 meters, or 8 and 13. That's still a normal range. But realizing that at the racing feeling side, it's rhythm and timing. I would increase random and variety in season as much as possible with developing athletes, because what is it going to do? It's going to make them make better decisions, and it's going to help them with their athletic stance and balance. And then just use the environments you have to your advantage. We all have, different things at our mountain. Just look at what you've got and then just absolutely reap them apart to take, use what you have in your environment. And I see little programs on little tiny hills do this so well. I see programs at big mountains with great terrain do this so well. And then in between, you see all of everything else. But this is the thing, if you use in your environments to whatever you want to teach, it's so easy. So yeah, that's what I condense it down to in terms of just using random environments, variable training, what Josh asked me to talk to you all about tonight. So whatever questions you may have, please throw them at me. No questions?
I'll ask a question, Sash. How you doing? It's Pete.
All right. What's up, Pete?
Let me just get my video going here. What's your focus in, all these great points, by the way, thanks for the presentation. But how do you break down what you're talking about over the course of the season? A lot of these clubs, we don't get to ski much in the summer. We might have a few of our FIST programs that do ski a little bit in the fall, but other than that, we're starting in November. Like how much time do you think for younger coaches do you want to focus, really giving them the random training skills that you're talking about outside of preparing for races? I think that gets confusing.
I would say, yeah. Can you hear me? I mean, I would
Yeah.
say in slalom, for a FIS athlete, I wouldn't be afraid to go, a young FIS athlete, first, second year athlete, I wouldn't be afraid to do 80% of this in season.
Yeah.
To be totally honest, in slalom especially, because all you're doing is you're just getting them in a better athletic position. And if they're in a better athletic position, they can ski faster, especially at the level they're at. And I always try to do a little bit of this and a little bit of rhythm and timing. But the overall perspective, GS is more rhythm and timing is a bigger factor in GS skiing than it is for slalom. Slalom is more about athleticism. So if you're an athlete, if you're balanced and you're in an athletic position, you can be an athlete. So that's how I think it helps more in slalom. In GS, I would say, I would almost flip it more 50-50 at the FIS age. And if they're not skiing much in summer. But at even younger ages, like within the U16s, U16s, they can ski on 20, 20, they have the two radiuses. They have the radius for the 16s, and then they have the radius for the FIS, the rate ski they're going to use next year. I would say spend, doing regular GS, but do it on the FIS skis, training GS on the FIS skis, because they're going to have to move in a much better way. I'm watching our U16s now, our athletes that ski on the FIS ski full time. I watch their skiing. I'm like, okay, that's going to help them. I watched the kids skiing on the U16 ski. They all drop their hip in early, and you're just like, they're ingraining patterns that are just not going to help them long term. So, skiing with no poles, for example, that would be considered, in that genre. Do it as much as you can.
And the volume of free skiing versus the time you spend in a course for coaches that not get. I know we need to put them in those movement patterns that we're trying to force in a course, but I think sometimes the free skiing, the varied skiing outside of the course is missing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to give a number or percentage on that, because it all depends on your environment you have at your home. I mean, if you're from Buck Hill and I tell you go free ski 50% of mine, and you'd be like, I'm going to go play ice hockey, like, you go nuts. But if you're, in one of your resorts where you have great tree skiing and mogul skiing, and you're skiing all the different environments you have out there, or you're very focused and you have a very, determined athlete who's very focused on feeling something and going out there and working on something, then use that to your advantage. I mean, if you have one of those kind of situations, you use a lot of that. So I think it depends on the situation. I don't think there's a rule.
All right, thanks. I'm sure there's got to be some more questions out there. Or comments.
All right.
Yeah, we had a couple questions in the chat. Sash, can you expand a little bit more on queuing?
Queuing. So that's when we talk about that 3D model, like understanding, the fundamentals, understanding athletic stance in the transition, understanding athletic stance in the initiation, completion, release, really being, having a good understanding of what that is. But then when an athlete's skiing, they can't think of all that shit. So just being like, really, what is that specific athlete's cue? And, that cue could be zipper facing the outside, or they imagine that they got lasers coming out of their hip sockets, and they're keeping the laser in a certain part, facing down the hill in a certain way. So that would be the cue. Those cues that we distill down to, what we're finding is if they're more outside the body, either visual or feel, are going to be more effective. And the reason they're more effective is because it flows through the central nervous system much faster, because you allow the athlete to find the way to do it instead of telling them the way to do it.
And additionally, one more question here from the chat. Do you have any suggestions for prepping young racers for this kind of training without overwhelming them? And ideas on more child-friendly language. This is looking at like 5 to 9-year-old.
Child-friendly language. Sorry, they might use some S and F words. Sorry. Child-friendly. I hope that wasn't the reason they were asking that, but it'd be just, I don't think in terms of just language, just saying, can you do it quick? I think pole plant, the kids should learn what a pole plant is. Can you speed up the pole plant? Can you slow down the pole plant? Those are words I think, young kids can understand. Can you do it quick? Can you slow it down? Can you keep your upper body facing down the hill? Can you keep your bib down the hill? Those are cues that I think kids at a young age can understand. Can you go from one ski to the other? Can you step from one ski to the other? That's active weight transfer. Step from one to the other, step from one to the other. When we talk about balance, can you move or not? If you're doing it quick, are you doing it with rhythm? Bum, 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 you're in balance. Snow contact, can you keep the skis on the snow? So I think those are very simple languages I think you can use for U10s, and I think you can use it for U8s to some extent.
Thanks. And one more here, last one. And how much video do we use on our athletes?
Should we use on our video? Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know. That's a good question. I think I think there's an over dependency on video. I think athletes like to watch themselves. I think showing video of someone doing it well, like if you find the example of them doing it well, having them watch that over and over again is good. I think video to identify I think video is really helpful to identify the chunk that you want to fix. So if you have an athlete that doesn't know how to keep the skis on the snow, is struggling with ski snow contact, kind of identifying why that's the case. So videos, identifying what's important, what's next. But once it's identified, go out there and work on it, and then only really watch the video that's showing them doing it better. But I think we probably do too much video.
Yeah, we've had the conversations about creating dependence on it as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Are there any more questions floating around out there? Does anyone else want to chime in and have anything that's kicking around in the front of their brain?
Sweet.
Oh.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sasha. I'll let you get to bed. Thank you for chiming in from Europe, and we really appreciate it. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks for your time, guys. Bye-bye.
All right, we'll kick it off to our next presenter. He's one of the trainers at CSI Calgary, Nathaniel Morris. Nate, thanks for hopping on this call, and we'll be talking about organizing a yearly training process and with regards to physical fitness. And Nate, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, can you hear me and can you see this, Josh? All good. Okay,
yep,
awesome.
We can hear and see you. Good to go.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks for having me. I go by Nate. I work at the Canadian Sport Institute Calgary, and I've worked there for about 6 years now. And I've been involved with alpine skiing throughout the 6 years that I've been at the CSI. I also did my master's degree at the U of C, looking at how to better diagnose and restore strength following ACL injuries in elite skiers. So, this is something that's pretty, close to my heart and something that we're going to talk about here. So Josh kind of asked me just to go over, a bit of a framework for organizing the training process throughout what a typical year might be for alpine skiers. And so it's a bit general. We don't really get into the weeds of things, but I'll leave some time, hopefully at the end, for us to go into some more of the details if you guys have questions on some of the more specific things. I also didn't really get to listen to Sasha's presentation, so I apologize if I contradict anything that he has said. And also important to note is that a lot of the content that I'll be talking about is influenced by mentors that I've had, including Dr. Matt Jordan, who's a professor at the University of Calgary, and who also worked with Alpine Canada for the past 10 years, I believe, as their director of sports science. So as a quick overview, we're going to go over a couple of key messages about why this is important. Why is physical preparation important for skiers? Then we're going to talk about what actually matters for performance in alpine skiing. And that would be like our end goal, talking about where we want our skiers to be. So we begin with that in mind, what actually matters. And then we talk about how do we organize the training process to actually get to where we want to go. And then at the end, we'll go over a couple considerations and some reflection points. So quickly, some things that are probably intuitive to all of us is that fitness matters. It matters to support the on-snow training loads, the high on-snow training loads that our skiers have, right? The athletes that have a higher work capacity, a tolerance to handle more training load, are able to deal with the high load training camps, the altitude, the back-to-back training days. They're able to deal with that better. They're able to string together better, higher quality training runs and training days, right? Which hopefully leads to better performance over time, right? Another key message that's important or probably intuitive to us is that fitness matters to reduce injury risk. Alpine skiing is an inherently high-risk sport, right? Where our athletes are traveling at high speeds, experiencing high loads, and the risk of traumatic injury is high, right? The current rates for ACL injuries in elite skiers is about 5 out of 100 athletes per season, which is about 1 in 20, which is a lot, right? And what we know is that there are modifiable factors that are intrinsic to the athlete that we can change that reduce injury risk, right? And more literature is available on these types of things. Where do we actually start? When we're thinking about preparing athletes physically for the demands of the sport, for skiing, where do we begin? It can be quite confusing, right? Maybe stuck here. First thing that we can do is determine what actually matters. What matters for performance in our sport and for reducing injuries in our sport. This is our destination. Where do we want to be able to go? The next thing is measure what matters. Where are we currently in relation to where we want to be? Next is we try to create a plan, a map that gets us from where we are to where we want to go. And then lastly, we measure again, and we continuously measure along the way to make sure that we're on the right track. Today, we're not really going to talk about measuring what matters, which would be our fitness assessments that we do, but we're going to talk about what matters and then how we create a plan and what that plan looks like throughout the year. So what physical performance factors actually matter to compete at an elite level of ski racing and to compete safely? We can think of these physical factors as kind of building blocks where we have our competition movement, what we actually need to do in our sport at the top. And then we have all these other physical factors that act as building blocks to help support what we actually do. And we're going to focus on a couple of these building blocks, which are movement competency, foundational performance factors, and specific performance factors. So when we talk about movement competencies, we're talking about the ability to perform various movement skills, basic movement skills, such as locomotor skills, running, skipping, hopping, jumping, and then object manipulation skills, being able to kick a ball, throw an object, hold a stick, things like that. And then balance and stability skills, right? Like our ability to balance on one leg, things like that, right? And do those in a proficient manner. And being able to develop these generic skills, especially at a young age, they help build the foundation, provide this building block for us to develop more complex and more sport-specific skills, and also to be able to load those movements, such as if you think of loading a movement like a squat or a run, loading them safely. Then we have these foundational performance factors, which are these physiological or biomechanical factors like muscle size, muscle cross-sectional area, right? Which underpins the expression of other physical abilities that might be more specific to our sport, such as explosive strength or how fast we can produce force. And these foundational performance factors, they don't necessarily directly relate to sport performance. So, for example, the skiers with bigger muscles aren't necessarily the best skiers, but having a bigger muscle allows us to express force in different ways more effectively, right? Athletes with bigger muscles have a higher capacity to produce more force. And if they can produce more force, generally, then we can work on the ability to produce force fast. Then we have these specific performance factors. So these physical abilities like muscle power or rate of force development, right? Producing force fast, or limb stiffness, that are associated with aspects of sport performance, or they're directly related to sport performance. And they include considerations for postures, velocities, and time for force application. So, for example, can we produce force in a specific posture at a specific joint angular velocity and under specific time constraints that might be more specific to the constraints that we would experience in our sport. When we think about alpine skiing and the demands of alpine skiing, it's quite unique compared to other sports, because we have these long and slow contraction cycles. Often we think of alpine skiers as being like really explosive athletes, but the sport is actually characterized by these really slow joint angular velocities. Like even in the in slalom, where joint angular velocities are the fastest, they're under 80 degrees per second, versus in elite sprinting, the joint angular velocities of the knee are over 1,000 degrees per second. And in these turns, like in the turn in a GS or slalom, we're experiencing these high force, quasi, meaning almost isometric / eccentric contractions. So in GS, for example, where a turn takes just over a second, the majority of that time is actually spent isometrically, where the muscle is static, right? And then slowly lengthening. And the forces that are experienced in the outside leg in a GS turn would be over one times an athlete's body weight. So high forces and long, slow contractions. From a physiological perspective, heart rates during a run are over 95% of an athlete's max, and the oxygen consumption during a run would be about 75 to 90% of an athlete's max, right? So these are kind of like characterizing the sport and the biomechanical and physiological requirements, things that happen. When we think about beginning with the end in mind in terms of physical training and how we get to where we want to be, we can picture or think about the ideal athlete who's gone through our developmental phases, who has worked their way up to the provincial and then the national team, and what they look like from a physical capacity standpoint and a movement competency standpoint. What do we want them to look like? We want them, from a movement competency standpoint, to be able to have these basic movement skills, the ability to run, jump, land, change of direction. Not because that directly relates to their sport, but because it allows us to train in a variety of different ways. It allows them to have more movement solutions, right? It gives us a way to, if we're on the road and we don't have access to bikes, we can achieve a certain conditioning stimulus through other methods. We also want them to have these basic fundamental skills that we would use, movement skills that we would use in the weight room, the ability to squat, lunge, hinge at the hips, push, pull, things that we would use and then load. And if they've developed these adequately, by the time they reach the provincial or national team level, we can then use more advanced training methodologies. And then we think about basic mobility requirements, the ability to get into deep hip flexion, full hip extension, the ability to dissociate at the thorax, the ability to dorsiflex at the ankle to be able to get into a good squat position or even just a good skiing position. When we think about these foundational performance factors, these performance factors that underpin more specific factors, we want our athletes, our skiers, to be able to have high degrees of maximal muscle strength. And we see in our higher level athletes that they can display single leg strength of upwards of 4 times body weight when we do an isometric leg press. They have high degrees of work capacity, so they can tolerate large amounts of training loads. And they have high degrees of limb symmetry, not only for a performance perspective, like to be able to perform at a high level, because skiing is a bilateral sport where you do turns on both sides. But from an injury reduction standpoint, the literature is pretty clear right now about athletes who are more asymmetrical seem to be at a higher risk for injury. And then from a specific performance factor standpoint, we want our ideal skier to have a high degree of eccentric rate of force development. What that means is the ability to put on the brakes fast, right? And then also the ability to maintain high amounts of power output. So they're able to produce a lot of power and they're able to maintain that. So when we think about these competencies and capacities, how do we organize the development of them through the year? We can simply think about this through 3 distinct but yet intermingled sequences that involve, 1, an acquisition phase, where this would account for the bulk of, I guess, our off season, where our focus is on the foundational performance factors, or these performance factors that are antecedent to these more specific factors. So our work capacity, our maximal strength, limb symmetry, general athleticism, these movement skills. Then we would transition or bleed into this more of a specialization phase, where now we're focusing on those specific performance factors. So our eccentric rate of force development, how fast we can apply the brakes, right? Then our anaerobic system, things of that nature. And during this phase, we might be on snow. We might be reestablishing our technical competence in skiing while we're working on these specific physical performance factors. And then lastly, we would have this realization phase. So where we're realizing our peak athletic form through tapering. So training loads have been reduced. We still have these maintenance loads for our foundational and our specific performance factors, but this phase is mostly accounted for by our sport specific training loads, right? And because the ski season is quite long, athletes can spend a lot of time in this phase, but that can lead to a decrease in the physical capacities that we developed earlier. It's important to note that throughout these phases, that sport performance or ability to do our sport will change. So in this acquisition phase, this phase where we're working on these foundational performance factors, where training loads are higher, volumes are higher, that our ability to do our sport will be decreased. But as training loads decrease and as the focus shifts to more sport specific work, that sport performance would be increased. It's also important to understand that we wouldn't just go through each of these phases or sequences just once, that they occur or that they can occur at multiple scales, meaning they can occur at the macroscopic level, so throughout this training year, and they can occur multiple times throughout the training year, but they can also occur within a specific training block and within a specific training week. So at the mesocycle level and at the microcycle level, you might have an acquisition, a specialization, and a realization phase. So they can occur multiple times at multiple different scales. So here's a little example of what a training year might look like and how we might organize those training phases accordingly. So if we look at beginning of June, where we might have our athlete intake testing, then we would go through we would start our acquisition phase with this sub-phase called an initial adaptation phase, where we're working on slowly developing the structural tolerance of the tendons, ligaments, bones to be able to handle more load, right? And then we would go through this acquisition phase where we're focusing on these foundational performance factors, right? We're getting athletes to work on multiple movement skills. We're working on work capacity. We're developing our ability to produce force, our maximal muscle strength. Then as we get closer towards the season, we would then go through this specialization phase. And then as we get closer towards the competitions and competitions that matter, we would then dip into this realization phase where training loads are reduced and the focus is now on competing, but we still have these maintenance doses within. And then we might touch on or go back to these acquisition phases or specialization phases just for small periods of time to be able to maintain some of these qualities. So we dip in and out throughout the training year. And that depends on your competition schedule. It depends on where you are in the world, right? It depends on what competitions are actually important and that type of thing. How do we get from this macro level down to the micro level? And this is just a small example, and there are unlimited ways to do this, and it totally depends on the population that you're working with, the age that you're working with. But this is an example of something I might do with a higher end developmental athlete, in this acquisition type phase. So we might have strength multiple times a week separated by a day. So Monday and Wednesday. On Tuesday and Thursday, maybe we're working on fundamental movement skills. We're introducing movement skills. Maybe we're doing track work on the track, where we're working on the ability to run, the ability to change direction. Maybe we just play different games. And then during those days, we also work on our work capacity through extensive aerobic intervals. So intervals that are not maximal, but they're longer in duration and they have shorter rest periods. And we might do that on Tuesday, Thursday, and then on Friday, maybe we do another strength day, but instead of in the weight room, we are at the field and we're doing circuit-based training, working on our capacity to tolerate loads. And then maybe we have more intensive aerobic intervals where the intensity is higher and the durations are a bit shorter. That's an example of a microcycle at the acquisition phase. Within that microcycle, we have to choose exercises. And the exercises that we choose will depend on our goal. So in that case, we are trying to acquire these foundational performance factors. And so our exercise choice should reflect that, right? If we're trying to achieve a certain training effect, which is generally would be maximal muscle strength or muscle hypertrophy, which is muscle size. And then as we go through these different phases, our exercise choice should reflect the training effect that we're trying to have. One thing to note is that as we go through these different phases, we're applying a training stimulus to try to have a certain training effect. And what happens is the athlete adapts in a specific way, and we call this the reaction curve, right? So you apply a stimulus, performance in your sport would decline, you would compensate and hopefully achieve this adaptation, hold on to this adaptation for a specific period of time. And then if you don't continue to train, then that reverses. You lose that training effect, okay? The ability to hold on to that training effect or the duration at which that training effect lasts is called the residual. So for example, if I train to achieve an increase in maximal muscle strength and I adapt, I achieve that training effect will only last so long if I don't continue to train it. So for different training effects and different levels of athletes and other different factors lead to different training residuals, meaning different durations at which those training effects last. And this is an important thing that we have to consider when we're looking at training in season. So short training residuals, athletes with lower training ages and athletes who are recovering from injuries, generally training effects last for shorter periods of time, and the training stimulus needs to be revisited more often. And then certain things like speed, timing, those things need to be revisited more often because the training effect doesn't last as long. Some of the more medium training residuals would be maximal muscle power, explosive strength, so how fast we can produce force, and then maximal muscle strength are kind of in that medium range. And then we have these long training residuals. So things like aerobic capacity, which take long times to develop, but the training effects actually last for quite a long time. once developed. Then things like maximum strength and maximal power can actually last quite a bit of time as long as we apply the appropriate maintenance load, right? Which is generally for those things about once every 7 to 10 days. If we can apply a stimulus, we can maintain it for quite some time. And then athletes with higher training ages tend to be able to hold on to training effects for longer. So often you might see athletes who are older and who are doing types of training that you might find interesting or non-traditional, and they might look like that's what's gotten them to where they are. But really, athletes who have gone through this long period of development where they've developed these foundational performance factors, they can actually hold on to those for quite some time. And so it may just be a matter of, it's not those other training methods, but what they've developed over the course of their, developmental years. Some considerations for in season, which is where we're heading to right now, is that we have to keep the end in mind, right? So we're thinking about where we want our athletes to be when they're in their early 20s, mid 20s, when they're on the development team, the national team. We have to keep that in mind at these younger years, that we are trying to develop these athletes, develop these foundational performance factors. And so we need to revisit them and not just think about, winning a race or, success at these younger ages, but how we're developing their physical capacities through the years. And I understand there are a lot or some barriers to training within season, some of them being equipment. There's generally not strength equipment everywhere in the world that our athletes go. Other barrier is that athletes tend to feel sore and they don't want to train because they feel sore. But one of the best ways to mitigate this is by maintaining frequency, even if it's just in small doses. Providing athletes with a training stimulus can help reduce that soreness effect. And then the actual methods that we use to train in season can reduce this soreness experience, right? By not using maximal eccentric loads, or by using more concentric isometric training methods, we can have a kind of reduce this soreness effect. One other thing to consider is this idea of being optimal versus being robust. We might not always have the opportunity to do what we would consider optimal, which might look something like this. You race on the weekend, you have a day off, then you start to ski, then you have a really good lift that's early in the week, and then you ski, and then you have another activation lift prior to your race, which might be something like jumps, throws, cleans, something as an activation before our race. That might, you might rarely have the occasion to be able to go through and do this, but we need to be agile as coaches and find a way to have a training plan that's robust, where even if we're not in the ideal or optimal schedule, we can find a way to fit these things in. So maybe that is a small lift early in the week. That's 2 to 3 exercises, 1 to 2 sets might be enough for that week to be able to provide the stimulus needed to maintain some of these training effects. In terms of off-season considerations, especially at the younger ages, encourage participation in multiple sports in order to develop those movement competencies that we know are important, right? That are building blocks to some of these other things. And then focusing on the fundamentals. So when we're thinking about developing these foundational performance factors, developing them through fundamental exercises and not some of these things that, you know, look cool, but don't really provide a training a good training effect. So in summary, fitness matters for supporting on-snow performance and for reducing injury. Work capacity and strength, these key foundational performance factors, they underpin our more specific performance factors. And we need to spend a lot of time in the acquisition phase to develop those things. And also it's important that we can revisit those in season when we have times where on-snow loads aren't as high. And then lastly, it's important for us to be agile and to think about a robust plan versus the optimal plan, because often we won't be able to do what's optimal. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, some of it's very high level, but it applies to all levels. And, you know, Nate, that was really good talking about how, you know, we have a long-term and a short-term focus, but our goal is, like, you know, within Canada, long-term athlete development. So we really need to think about the long-term effects of what we're doing at the younger ages as well. Have one. Curtis, go for it. Chime in.
Hey, Nathaniel, is great. Thank you. This was actually regarding, I guess, injuries. Like, obviously your slide is up here, fitness matters, supporting and reducing, or supporting fitness or performance and reducing injuries. Obviously that's like 100%. My belief and what I try and do with the kids, especially the young ones, it's awesome you have it on here, is just coordination development and, you know, physical literacy. I kind of have been doing my own back of the envelope, like, look testing for the last probably 10, 15 years, even back to when I was ski racing. And I was just curious if you have any data on, I guess, kids or athletes that like pass that look test or are athletic or more athletic than others. Is their risk of injury lower? Do you see anything, I guess, over the years with that?
Like, from my perspective, anecdotally within the Canadian system.
I guess, sorry to interrupt. I guess anyone after your reply, any coaches out there, if they see, like, because for me, it was like, I've seen it, sorry to like chime in, but from what I've seen, it's not obviously 100%. Kids get beat up when they're great athletes, but it seems like the kids that are more well-rounded, especially kind of through U14, U16 into FIS, they just, I don't know, they seem to, whether it's recoveries on the snow because they're more coordinated or athletic, they seem to just avoid it more. And again, maybe it's biased because it's what I believe in, but that's why I kind of was proposing the question. Sorry, go ahead.
From my perspective, Nate, I'll chime in.
Go
From
for it.
my perspective on snow, yes. And I don't have any data from that, and that's more of a gut feeling, in that the more athletic and the more skills and movement patterns and basic understanding of how they move, the less likely they are, or I shouldn't say the less likely they are, the more adapted they are to getting out of dangerous situations, I should say, Curtis. So that's my feeling on that.
Okay, and what about, sorry, Nathaniel, I kind of just cut in there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, it's so hard because injuries are so complex, right? So you can't it's hard to say that because they're more athletic, they won't get injured. We can't really say that, because there's a high chance that even if they are more athletic and they end up doing better in our sport, the more you go through the sport and the higher levels you get to, the risk of injury increases. That's what we see with the data. But there is more and more work coming out with researchers like Lisa Mueller, Maria Weston, who are doing a lot of work with youth skiers and kind of looking at these physical factors that influence injury risk in these developmental athletes. And what they're seeing points to exactly what you're saying. These athletes who compete in more sports than just one, and who, I mean, they measure these things in different ways, but like who have better physical literacy tend to get injured less through those developmental years. So the literature is starting to support the things that we are seeing.
Awesome. Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Any more questions out there? Thanks for that, Curtis. Well, Nate, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions or anything that they would like to ask Nate, you can pass that question my way via email or via text, and I can get you the answer. Really appreciate your time, and thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over here to Alexia Tam. She is Alpine Canada's Safe Sport Manager, newer in the position, but she wants to talk to us about Safe Sport, and I really appreciate that she's here.
Thanks, Josh. I'm excited to be with you all today. I'm doing double duty. Everybody's doing coach education today. I'm with the group in Southern Ontario. It's kind of fun. We all got to be in person today, so I hope you all get to be in person soon with coach education as well. I am going to share my screen here. Alrighty. So a little bit about me. Josh did a quick intro of who I am. But in addition to my role at ACA, I'm also contributing academic to this field. So I've been in it, safe to say, for a hot minute. So I did my Bachelor of Kinesiology, my Master's of Science. I'm currently working on my PhD, so my doctorate in this field. My areas of expertise are in interpersonal relationships, sexual violence, and peer-to-peer based relationships. So that's sort of where I'm coming from, and why it makes a whole bunch of sense that I'm over at ACA now, and that I'm here to support all of you. So we were going to do this little discussion thing, but I see there's a ton of us, so it probably won't work very well. So I'm going to skip over that. So I thought we could talk about a couple different things today. So setting the stage, where we are in our safe sport journey and where we got to go. So setting the stage, this is, I hope to just provide you with some contextual background, what safe sport is, sort of what are all the components of it, and try to hit on a lot of the misconceptions of safe sport. So safe sport is the collective responsibility of all of us, every single one of us, that's athletes, parents, coaches, officials, volunteers, anybody that is in the sport environment, to recognize and report acts of maltreatment and prioritize the welfare, safety, and rights of every person at all times. So when we watch the news, when we hear all these crazy stories, things coming out, we always hear about the acts of harm done to an athlete by their coach, by a person in a position of power. And while that is absolutely important to keep in mind, safe sport is not just for that athlete's protection, it's for the coach's protection, it's for the parents, it's for really everybody in that space. And so it's every single one of our responsibility to engage with it. So maltreatment, just as a baseline, I like to sort of talk about terms and stuff a little bit at the beginning, and I apologize if you've heard it all before, but these things are called 100 different things. So what I like to do is sort of give you my understanding of the definition. So when I mention different words, you kind of understand where I'm coming from. But basically, maltreatment is understood as an umbrella term, which encompasses all types of physical and or emotional harm, sexual abuse, neglect, negligence, commercial or other exploitation, which results in actual or potential harm to the World Health definition limits it to a child's health, but I really believe it to be the health success of everybody in the sport environment. The infographic there below, just to sort of demonstrate how complex this field is. It doesn't need to be, but how complex it is. These are sort of the different types of ways that research has classified maltreatment. So some categorize it by type of harm, some look at severity, others look at intentionality. So there's tons of different frameworks in the safe sport world. I don't love to focus on any of them. It doesn't need to be more complicated than it needs to be. And so I think today we can just talk about the basics and then continue to grow and learn together, as it is very new for all of us. And so we can't do everything in one day. So little steps along the way and we'll get to where we need to be. So these are the 4 big buckets of harm. So this is sexual violence, psychological violence, physical, and neglect. Sexual violence, I won't spend too much time talking about. I think we're all fairly comfortable with what that entails. Psychological violence can actually be broken up into contact and non-contact. So think of contact behaviors that result in emotional harm or emotional trauma. So let's say you're like whipping a clipboard or something at a kid. It wouldn't necessarily fall in the physical violence category because the intention is not to harm them, but the intention is to make them feel scared or like emotionally frightened or whatever that is. So that actually falls under the psychological violence category. And within this category, we also talk about the degrading comments, sort of the name calling, the belittling, the degrading, that all falls under psychological violence. Physical violence, something that we're starting to talk about more and more, is discipline. My goodness. Violence is punishment. Sorry, it's been a long day. Violence is punishment. So that's, or training as punishment. So when we are making kids do extra workouts or extra runs or as punishment, as discipline, that sort of all falls under the physical violence sort of category. We should not be punishing our athletes with physical requirements. I know that often when we talk about this old school sort of type of coaching, that's what a lot of us probably grew up on. I'm a summer athlete. I played soccer and football growing up. So there was always laps, wind sprints, which people used to love to call suicides, until you threw up, that kind of stuff. So that all falls under that physical violence category. And then neglect. The best way to think of neglect are acts of omission. So not providing adequate care, not supporting athletes return to injury, or not listening to the advice of medical experts and like forcing athletes back prematurely from injury, all that kind of stuff. So when we talk about types of harm, we know that these occur in relationships where there is a subordinate, authoritative relationship, but these also occur in peer-based relationships as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. Sexual violence, absolutely, and those often manifest in hazing practices. Psychological violence, we see it name calling, it manifests pretty much the same way. Physical violence, obviously, that's very easy to spot. That's hitting, kicking, slapping, all that kind of stuff. Neglect, not so much, but it can happen in forms of like exclusion or like forcing somebody out of a group, things like that. So I just wanted to share with you some very quick prevalence data. And this is from the most recent national team survey that they did. So it was done with not just Alpine skiers. So this research was done with national athletes across the country, across sports, summer, winter, you name it. they all participated, or a lot of them participated. Shockingly, though, 75% of athletes reported experiencing at least one type of maltreatment. We do not want to see those numbers. And while the prevalence rates have changed, now that we're looking at other types of harm as well, neglect is the highest. And so that is something that the research community I can speak on is starting to look into more and more, and how do we mitigate the effects of neglect. But also the rates of psychological violence are going up, and up. And this is probably because we're starting to have a shared language about what constitutes psychological violence and emotional harm. And we're actually seeing athletes starting to report more and more of that. And it is nice to say that the rates of sexual violence are going down, but they're still there. So for me, even at 1%, it's still something that needs to be addressed. Really briefly, I wanted to talk to you about critical relationships in sport. We're most familiar with that coach-athlete relationship, but critical relationships in sport are relationships that keep the system running. If you take any one of these out, it's safe to say that the house would come down, especially when we're talking about youth athletes. I just got a notice that my internet is unstable, so if I freeze, I apologize. So there's also that parent-athlete relationship that's really important when we're coaching, or for our young athletes. They are just as reliant on us as coaches as they are of their parents to get them to and from practice, to get them where they need to go, but also for that emotional support. Another big one that is often neglected is that peer-based relationship. We actually see the incident rates of experiences of harm to be higher in peer-based relationships in sport than we do within that coach-athlete relationship. So athletes are actually experiencing more harm from one another than they are from their peers. So that is a big one to keep in mind, especially when we start to talk about maltreatment. And as we're starting to shift the narrative of safe sport from being a coach-athlete based, but to really being much more holistic and looking at the other critical relationships in sport. So again, this was going to be part of the poll and the discussion, but unfortunately with 100 of us, we don't have access to that. But to yourself, I want you to consider some of these questions. So maybe make a note of it, or just think about them in your head. But I want us to take a closer look at power, because whenever we talk about maltreatment that occurs within a coach-athlete relationship, all of the definitions and things like that, they tell us that it's when one person has significant power over another. So I want you to consider, first of all, what does power mean to you? So if you hear it just like as a buzzword, what does that mean? What do you think of? Is it strength? Is it speed? Is it power to influence? Is it authority? Just sort of what kind of buzzwords come up when you hear just the word power. Once you've done that sort of reflection, and maybe you could take a note of these questions and get back to it at your own time, then I want you to consider, what does it mean to have power as a coach? Is it different than the question above? Is it different than what does power mean to you? And what does it mean in the context where you are coaching young kids perhaps, or anybody for that matter? And then following that, I challenge you to think of the ways in which power and violence might be connected. And the reason I like talking about power, one, it's sort of a big concept that influences my academic work in this space, but also I think it's really important. And there is a very significant link to power and maltreatment. But I also challenge you all to think about the ways in which your athletes have power. So when we do discuss the coach-athlete relationship, there's an undeniable difference of power there. I wouldn't say that coaches have power over. So I challenge you to think of power as sort of like a thing that can go up or down. It's very flexible, it's very dynamic, and in some situations, you can give or take power in different ways. And so that's why I challenge you to think of the ways in which your athletes have power, because while they might be in a subordinate position, let's say, they also do possess their own types of power, and that's very unique. And as a coach, what we want to do is we want to empower our athletes. We want to teach them to harness that and to use it in positive ways. And so our coaching style should reflect that. So instead of having power over, I challenge you to sort of approach it in a way that you have the power to harness or to develop somebody else's power as well. So next steps in the safe sport journey. So there's been all this discussion of prevention of harm, and that's sort of where we are. That's the stuff we read in the news every single day. If you Google safe sport in Canada right now, there's about, I want to say 5 or 6 cases just in the last 2 weeks of things that are coming out. So women's rugby, soccer, women's soccer as well. There's a couple incidents in figure skating, but just so that you can kind of get an idea, there's a ton happening right now. But all that is on this prevention of harm, which we absolutely need to do. We need to continue to do that. But this discussion on harm and violence and all these behaviors that we should and we shouldn't do, frankly, it sometimes can get a little bit scary. And so what I like to think about is, how do we move from prevention of harm to optimizing experiences? Because if we think of providing the best sort of experience and opportunity for our athletes to grow and learn, we shouldn't ever have to really worry about prevention of harm. It should always be in the back of our heads, but it shouldn't be our focal point. So I want you to think about things like, why do practices need to change if they've worked in the past? Respect in Sport likes to call it old school and new reality coaching styles. And so things that might have worked in the past just might not be acceptable now. What I like to compare safe sport to is our journey through concussion and our knowledge with that. If we think about where we were 5 years ago with concussion knowledge to where we are now, so much has changed. And concussion is the health and safety of our athletes' brains and their heads and things like that. And safe sport is the protection of their sense of self, of their emotional well-being, of their psychological well-being, and frankly, sometimes protection of their physical self as well. So I challenge you to think of some practices that we might just have to take a second look at. Sometimes we don't do it intentionally, but we were coached the way we were coached. And maybe that's just like not the best way to move forward. We also have to look at who's in our group, who's in front of us. And I know it's challenging and I don't want to put more work on coaches, but it's all about our athletes shouldn't be forced to adapt to us all the time. We have to meet them halfway there. So we have to take a moment to learn about how our athletes learn best, and then try to cater as best as we can to their learning styles. Does safe sport mean coaches need to be soft on athletes? Again, I think we can absolutely encourage athletes to challenge themselves and to take risks safely, obviously. But it needs to be done in a way that's encouraging and not pressuring, because that's when we could potentially end up with issues of psychological harm or things like that. Performance outcomes, I will say that performance outcomes will come. We will continue to have success, and that success will come through especially learning how your learners respond best. Does safe sport mean coaches can't develop a close relationship with their athletes? That's sort of been the trend, but that's absolutely not the case. You can 100% continue to develop close, trusting relationships with your athletes, especially in ski racing. It's absolutely necessary that those athletes trust you, trust your knowledge, trust your skill, and they trust that you're going to keep them safe when they're up there on the hill. But obviously it comes with boundaries. So as long as we're maintaining those boundaries and respecting that, it's not to say that you can't develop a meaningful relationship with your athletes. Oftentimes they spend more time with you and their teammates in training on the hill away from home than they actually do in school or at home with mom and dad, or their parents. So it's really important to still be a person that they can go to and that they trust. So doesn't safe sport open the door for people to complain about abuse when athletes are not selected to teams or when they receive less playing time? So the playing time piece won't necessarily apply to ski racing here, but these are common questions that often come up, but absolutely not. So as coaches, we are tasked with still doing our job. And what I have to say to that question is, as long as we make our criteria for team selection, for who's coming to what projects clear, then the big answer to this question is transparency. If we're putting our criteria out there, if we're being open and honest with both our athletes, their parents, whoever it might be, that should never be an issue of safe sport. And so as coaches, we still have to do our job as coaches. And at the end of the day, especially at the higher competition levels, that is making the best decisions for our teams. Okay, so a big part of the optimizing experiences piece is promotion of positive athlete development. And so there's this thing called athlete career excellence, and that's an athlete's ability to sustain a healthy, successful, and long-lasting career in both sport and big capital bold and life. And so we have to remember that while we would love every single one of our athletes to make the national team and to compete at a high level, there's a really small percentage of them that actually do. And so we want to try not to coach just for those few that are going to make it, for that less than 1%, but really all of those that are out there to have a good time, to compete, to be competitive, to go fast, and just really enjoy their time out there. So we want to remember that we're also developing humans, and we're out here to help develop and grow people as well. And with that, sport will come, and that's sort of tied into these three key beliefs here. So we know that the non-sport environment can affect athletic performance, and that's something we always have to keep in mind. Things might be going on in school that are challenging or at home. And I just want to say that stay open to those. If you create a space where your athletes feel comfortable coming to you and telling you those things, then it's something that you can work on together, how to best overcome those potential challenges and obstacles. Or maybe they just had a really bad day. Maybe they got their test back and they failed, or something's just really not going right, and they might just have an off day that day. And that's totally okay. And so just remembering that, yes, they might come to practice, or they might be at practice and might not be performing well. Just a simple like, hey, what's going on? Did something happen at school today or at home? And then we can go from there. Athletic performance is also facilitated by developing the core of who the athlete is as a person. So again, that's not just focusing on developing the physical self of an athlete, but also developing them mentally, emotionally, holistically. Which leads to the last point there, our 4 functional dimensions. So that's our behaviors, our mind, our emotions, and our physiology. So that's our body, are interrelated, and one change affects others. So how do we do this? These are 2 of the most popular person-centered learning strategies. There's 4 big ones. The other 2 big ones are patient-centered care. So that's what we see in healthcare settings, and child-centered parenting. And the intention behind these strategies is not just to let students, athletes, whoever it might be, run wild, and that they're the bosses and they control everything. Absolutely not. But it's understanding who our students are, who our athletes are, who our learners are, and giving them a sense of direction, a sense of empowerment, and a sense of autonomy over decisions that affect their lives. So bringing them into the conversation, and in a little bit, we'll talk about some ways to do that. And by in a little bit, I mean right now. So person-centered learning and maltreatment prevention go hand in hand. And the reason I say this is because if you take a person-centered approach or athlete-centered coaching, whatever you want to call it, approach, what you're really doing is creating an environment that is open, safe, communicative, and where your athletes feel like they have an active role in what's happening to them. So they're not just there to do what you say, but they're actually actively contributing, which in this big wraparound cycle actually gets them more involved in their own training. It gets them more engaged. It gets them to take more responsibility over their own training and their own learning. They're going to come ready to learn and ready to share in whatever it might be. The first big key component of person-centered learning is empowerment, and that's learners owning their own learning process. Us as coaches, we're giving them the opportunity to have more autonomy and control. So the best example that I like to give, and if some of you have sat in on my other calls, you would have heard me say it before. When we think of young kids and we're trying to get them to eat their vegetables, we say you can eat the broccoli or you can eat the peas, but you have to eat one. And so what that's doing is giving that child the autonomy to choose what they would like to do. So as the coach or as the parent in that situation, we're still setting boundaries, but we're letting that young person make their own choice. And that helps in that empowerment process. There's different ways to do this. You can give athletes choices. And say you have to teach a couple different skills that day. You can give them choice on the order. What would you guys like to do first? You can give athletes the opportunity to lead warm-up, lead sessions, maybe lead a skill themselves. Things like that all help to foster empowerment. Also, when it comes time to making decisions, maybe not just sit down with the parents or with the other coaches, but bring the athletes into that space too. Even if they have nothing to say, they will feel grateful for even being in the room or in that conversation. It's really important because maybe one day they will have something to say. Self-direction. So once we really get the empowerment piece going, this will follow. And this is where learners take action and decide what knowledge and skills they need to be successful. And so what this looks like, eventually you might start to see it in your older years, athletes, but essentially what this does is we're giving them the space to tell us what they need. As coaches, we absolutely have the knowledge and skills to get them where they need to be. But they might be able to come up to you and say, hey, this is really not working. Can we try something else? Or I saw this on Instagram. Can we try this strategy or whatever it might be? And then it's up to you to obviously take the best approach. But creating a space where they're self-directed. And then finally sharing. The idea behind this, that we learn best when we're able to teach somebody else something. So if you're trying to teach a skill, for example, one way that you can engage athletes in this sharing process is to, everybody's on their phones now. Anyways, they love using it for everything other than important things, but say, hey, take out your phones, film each other doing a run, doing a skill, and then you have to provide feedback for your peer, your teammate. And so they really have to understand that skill themselves in order to break it down and give feedback for somebody else. So engages them in this sharing piece, or opportunities to teach other ones, maybe that's teach younger kids, things like that. Is just engaging them in ways to share their knowledge because it enhances their own learning. All right, so how do we move forward in all of this? So obviously we want to continue the prevention of maltreatment against everyone in sport. We want to eliminate behaviors that impairs the development of others, ensuring that everyone receives safe and effective care in sport, and ensuring everyone can obtain the best possible outcomes. So this graphic here are just some of the pillars of how we do that. So improving EDI, for example, even just being on this call, we're enhancing awareness and understanding. And we're going to continue to monitor and evaluate our progress. We're enforcing our policies. Over at Alpine Canada, we do have an independent complaint mechanism, which I could spend a whole other hour talking about. but you do have access to that. All member clubs of ACA have access to our independent third party. So we don't expect you to manage complaints and cases within your own clubs, and we don't expect Alberta Alpine to manage them. So those are all things that can come to us. It is a service that we have for you. And so I also, again, this was going to be part of the poll, but I want you to think about how you can contribute to the advancement of safe sport. And so what resources, tools, and support would you like to see? And if there's any that are coming to mind right now, please throw them in the chat, and I will make note of them, or you could shoot me an email. And I'd also like you to think of what is Alberta Alpine or ACA doing well that you would like to improve, or what you would like to see continue, and how are some ways that we can improve. I also want to say I've been working really closely with Josh and Pat at Alberta Alpine, and a few of your member clubs already, to do things like this, to come in, do coach education, athlete sessions, parent sessions. And that is a service that is available to you as well. Just shoot me an email, and we can organize something for your club. In addition to that, I'm here for any need that you might have. So say something's come up at your club, you're not really sure what you should do, where you should go. You can shoot me an email, and it's right at the bottom of the screen there. And we can work through it together. I might recommend you do file a complaint and go through the independent third party, or if it's maybe not a safe sport thing, that could be handled with some sort of like mediation and discussion, things like that. But I do know that sometimes this stuff is scary, in that we often don't know where to take things or where to go. And so the last thing I want is for it to like fall through the cracks because we don't know where it should end up. So I do encourage you all to come and send it my way. I'd be happy to help. And also just education wise, I know where seasons are kicking off, and it's a great time for all of this coach education. So I'm absolutely here to help with that. I hope to be out west, hopefully pretty soon, for like the Lake Louise World Cup. I'll be there, I think, for the women's weekend. So if you see somebody that looks cold, come over, say hello, introduce yourself. Like I said, I'm a summer sport athlete, so this will be a lot of fun for me. Any questions for me? While I go, I see one in the chat here. What happens if someone has made a comment on the net, but you are the third party to see the comment? That's a great question. And so I would say if the comments are involving a minor, you have a duty to actually report that straight to your local authority and Child Protective Services. I would say even if you do see it, it is always something that you can file an official disclosure or report about. Then the independent third party will then, in sort of his due process, and he will recommend either something like I discussed, mediation or whatever, or if he deems it to be necessary of an investigation, and whatever those recommendations will be, he will send that forward. So thank you for that question.
And Alexia, I'm gonna jump in quick with Claudia's
Please.
question. I think that pertains a lot to safety on hill. So Claudio and anyone in this group, safety is paramount. If you see something, say something. If you hear something, say something, whether it be net issues, safety issues, athlete.
Oh, net, not
any-
like not on the internet. I got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
See,
yeah.
I'm new to the sport, so thank you so much.
No, it's all good. It could be both. So it could be
both.
either way. But yeah, if you see something, say something. If you hear something, say something. That's it.
Absolutely. So it's just, oh, it was the internet. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
So it's like I was saying, it's our collective responsibility to sort of tackle these things. And so that's a great sort of messaging to have, Josh, is if you hear something, see something, say something, because it's up to us to sort of protect that environment as best we can. Any other questions for me?
Anyone else out there? Anyone still here? Come on.
I know it's been a long day for you guys. Same with the coaches here. Everybody's doing all this on the same day.
And I think you addressed the question further up earlier, but does forcing them to hike the hill constitute physical violence or punishment?
I would say if we're forcing them to hike the hill, then yes. A good strategy for that is you can always say, okay, team, this is sort of what went wrong, or whatever. What do we think as a collective should be? How do we deal with this? And so again, it's helping to foster that empowerment piece. But if as the group, they're like, we should hike the hill, then hike the hill. But it's bringing them into the conversation as well. Also, I would say to try and refrain from forcing anything as much as possible. But, you know, I think it's always important that our athletes that they know why we're sort of recommending things. But again, I would say there is great strength in, and kids, athletes, they're smart enough to sort of know what went wrong and why things went wrong. So if you actually give them the sort of opportunity as a unit to say, how do we deal with this, or what do we do about this situation? They will come up with, I bet you, something that is quite appropriate in order to deal with that discipline or whatever it might be. But it's giving them the power to sort of, again, have a role in the decisions that affect their lives. Oh, good question. So there is a triage sort of chart on the Alpine Canada website of where to go. Things generally go straight to the independent third party. But if you have a question of whether it should go to the independent third party, or if it's a safe sport case at all, that's when you can absolutely reach out to me. You can reach out to me either way. I don't actually do any of the investigations. And that's because I work for ACA, and, you know, and I'm also here to support all of you. So all I can do is just direct you to the best option. But yeah, I would say definitely check in with myself or go straight to our website, where you can find our complaint form, and you can also find the email straight to our independent third party. And he has said to me that if people don't want to fill out a complaint form necessarily, but just want to get in contact with him and have a phone call, that is something that he is open to as well.
Thanks for that. And one thing that I speak to a lot is with Safe Sport, it's not, we still hold athletes accountable, but it's the communication and knowing the boundaries and what is acceptable within those. And so I think a lot of confusion sometimes from coach's side is very worried about, well, I can't hold this athlete accountable because this is what I would do instead. And maybe that's an old school thought of, I would make them hike the hill as a punishment or this. We just have to adapt our ways of doing things into what is within the bounds of acceptability and very appropriate for our athletes, and to deal with everyone as an individual human, I should say, and not just what we've been thinking of doing in the past. So yes, you still can hold athletes accountable. You just have to be very, the process has to be very straight up and forward, not behind closed doors.
Yes, this is a really good question to chat here. Yes, we don't want challenges to be considered harm. So again, it's that encouragement piece of, yes, this might be hard, this might be challenging, you might fail at it, but it's important for our development and our success, and our being like you and that athlete in particular. And so it's just about, again, how it's approached, pardon me, But I think it's really important to teach our young people how to fail. I might be stepping out on a limb here, but in the real world, unfortunately, there are winners and losers, and losers is a bad word, but there is success and there is failure, and we don't get participation medals for everything. And so I think it's a really important skill to teach our young people, is that it's okay to fall down as long as you know how to get back up again. And I don't mean fall down in terms of like actually falling down, but how to fail. And then us as coaches, we need to let them know that we are there to help pick them back up. And that's the important bit. And then that's when we will hopefully move out of that failure is considered harm, because our role as a coach is to continue to challenge those athletes, continue to encourage them to try new things, to be, yes, to make adjustments like the note in the chat says. And as long as we are creating an environment where the athlete feels safe to fail, that's important.
And yeah, and it's a great point. Failure is learning.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of time and now in this generation, people are afraid to fail. People are afraid to try, and individuals, I shouldn't say people, just individuals, whether it be an athlete or even us here, sometimes we're afraid to try something because we might fail. And failure is a great catalyst for change, as long as it's done in a safe manner. So
That's the big thing. As long as failure is absolutely learning, and as long as that athlete or person knows that if they do fall down, if they do fail, that there is a community there that is going to help pick them back up, and that we are working with them about how do we approach this, what's going to work best for you, and let's do it together. And I think that's totally how we avoid any sort of issues of it being a matter of safe sport, because failure in itself is not a safe sport issue. It's, again, a condition of learning. So if we can keep that in mind, I think we'll all be really successful.
awesome. So thank you so much, Lexia. And we've been on the call now for 2 hours. So let's give everyone a 15-minute break. So take a break, bio break, and let's meet back here at 2:15. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we'll give it one more minute to get everyone back in here, and we'll get going. Hi, Pat. How you doing?
Hey, Josh, I'm good. How about you?
Doing well. Doing well. See, try to get Sane in here for just a minute to say hello. If not, we'll kick it over to you.
Oh, lucky these folks.
All right, it's 2:15. Well, not getting Sane in here, but we'll see if we can get her in after Pat. Pat, if you can give us a little update from your desk and everything that's going on to keep the coaches, in the loop on everything. And yeah, off to you.
Sure. Well, thanks very much. And hi, everyone. Thanks for taking part of your Sunday off and working with Josh and all this. This is super important. I think we can all say that we're going to be much better off this year than we were last year. I do want to thank all of you coaches and such, for keeping your athletes engaged and still having fun last year. It wasn't easy. So a true testimony in your professionalism and all your hard work. So I do want to thank you all. Of course, we probably have some now the best trained athletes in the world now. So we should have a great racing season this year. Although we're in a much better place, obviously COVID is still going to be playing a huge part of our sport. I think the fourth wave certainly showed us that we have to be vigilant and keep working towards getting rid of this thing. AHS obviously has COVID protocols and restrictions in place. Your local ski hills and resorts have their own COVID protocols. And they also vary quite a lot between resorts too. So, and of course, Alpine, we've just posted our COVID protocols for all our sanctioned races. And that's from the basically U14 and up. And then with all of that, of course, if you're traveling even in Canada or outside internationally, there's separate protocols. So it's a lot to take in and make sure that everyone's trying to follow all the rules. But with all of that, we're still at least going to have some ski racing this year. And I don't know if Josh has already got into that, but certainly for Western Canada, Alberta is race central. We have more races than we've probably ever hosted. So, and certainly more than what's going on in BC. I don't know if with COVID and all, I don't know if there's any questions at all, or maybe we can do some questions at the end of my little blurb here. But if you do, just keep them till the end of my of this little talk here. Other items that we're working on, it's navigating through ACA's Alpine Excel program, along with some of the other directions that ACA management is seem to be moving towards. I'm sure if you haven't heard, but they're looking at having no diva team. Roles and responsibilities between the provinces. They're trying to make some changes there. ACA moving into running events again. So they've got a few interesting plans, and we're PSOs are all working with and trying to understand which direction they're going. And obviously there's a lot that we're not 100% behind. So we'll just keep pressing the management team at ACA and make sure that the provinces get, that our sport remains strong, I think is probably the most important part. One of the other things we'll be working on this year is Alberta Alpine's 5-year strategic plan ends this year, or this is our last year of it. So we'll be working on a new 5-year strategic plan, which is in the works right now, and have that in place for 2022 to 2028. Working on securing sponsors and partners for all our race series and others. That's, as you can well imagine, in a COVID world, begging for money is not easy, but we're starting to see some headway and looking forward to announcing some new partners. in the near future. We're also working on a website. That website, the new website, I should say, and it should be up and running within a couple of weeks. It's taken a little longer than we had hoped so, but it should be easier to navigate and be a little more user friendly. Of course, this year we do have a few big events, coming up. One being the Olympics, which is a pretty awesome kind of. Certainly looking forward to that. But more closer to home, obviously, we have our Lake Louise World Cups back this year, and then the NORAM Speed event right after. Pano is going to also have their NORAM event, which will be the test event for the World Juniors, which will be held in March. So World Juniors is the first time that Canada has hosted the World Juniors in Western Canada. Although it's in BC, Alberta's playing a big part in that race as well. And we certainly have athletes that have had potential of podium on that race and doing well. So truly looking forward to that. Nikiska stepped up with a 5-year commitment on ski cross track, which is really awesome for that group. Along with, of course, we're going to have a World Cup with, I think it's not a test, but one of the abilities for to see who will go into the Olympics with the national team. Skiing started in Alberta. We got both Norquay and Lake Louise, although limited, but people are on slope, and that's awesome. People are going to start having fun. Nikiska will be open soon for preseason, and the rest of our hills are doing really well. Castle's making snow. I think it's turning out. Once we get through this next little heat wave here, I think we're going to be off to the races. Again, have to have a huge big thanks to all of you coaches. I mean, obviously, without you guys, these programs wouldn't run properly. We're coming off a difficult year. This year is going to be much better, for sure. And I don't know, do you guys have any questions for me? Other than you, Dave Honeyman, because, your questions are always too difficult to answer. So. No questions?
Anyone awake out there? Let's go. Let's go. If you got any
I was
questions,
on mute, wasn't I?
You can also type them in the chat box as well.
That's true. That's true. Well, again, if there's no questions, my phone's on, email's there. So you guys, if you want to get a hold of me, please do.
I'll ask a question.
Oh,
This is Pete. How are you, Pat? Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
When will you know what sort of partners you're going to have for race hosting, just in terms of what sort of activation you have to have ready to if you've got banners or bibs or panels or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, Sporting Life is our partner for the U16. We're working on a 5th partner right now. I thought that one would have been done. So I'd say those two will be first, and then if we have any U14, U12 in us, so I'll let you know. But they're supposed to be happening. Like I say, it's a slower process than it should be in some cases, but
okay. And you guys will be there to support those partners. Yeah.
Correct.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, thanks, Pat. And if anyone has any questions at all or anything comes up, feel free to email Patrick at albertalpine.ca. Next in the lineup here, I'd like to introduce Sane, our member services. She's new this year, and she is a great resource. And a lot of you have already reached out to her through memberservices. The email there, but I'd like to introduce her so you know the face behind the email and the face behind what is actually making the wheels turn in the office. So off to you, Sunny.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So my name is Sanne, and I just started the member services coordinator position back in September. I think a few of you guys reached out to me, especially about this meeting as well. to be able to get the Zoom link. So that's maybe why we reached all the numbers. And yeah, excited to meet everyone. Please let me know if you guys have any questions. Yeah, you can send me an email at memberservices@albertaalpine.ca, or you can also just phone in. Actually, I guess Monday to Thursday I'm in the office, so you guys can just reach me there as well. Yeah, and otherwise just send an email. On the weekends, maybe CC Josh just in case. And yeah, I think that's it. I don't know if anybody has any questions already.
Does anyone have any registration questions or anything? I know some people have faced a few issues, but if there's anything out there that's glaring, or Sana, if you want to talk to anything that you've seen a few questions on from our coaches side that you can easily answer to help get some people through. Is there anything on your side like that?
Totally. Yeah. So with Snow Reg, I think if there's anything, I'm still kind of learning Snow Reg because I'm new with it as well. But if there's anything there, then please reach out because I am learning that platform, how to use it. So if anybody has any issues or questions about that, you can just, yeah, just let me know. And if I don't know, I'll make sure to find out for you guys. So that's probably the most important one. And then for this specific meeting, I think there might be a few people on the call that weren't able to actually register themselves. So we can figure that out tomorrow and deal with that and see if we can still get them signed up somehow.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and we'll be doing, I have attendance for everyone. So we'll be doing some back end attendance. So that's not a problem now. So
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Does
No
anyone have
problem.
any questions? Perfect. Well,
Awesome.
thank you, Sana, and we'll move on to our teams updates. We'll get those as we're full. I'm just rotating people in and out of the waiting room. So if you just give me a sec to for Sana to sign out, and then I will get our coaches to sign in here to give you an update on what the teams are going. While they're getting in here, I can actually Gavin's here. So Gavin, welcome. All right, we're going to hand it directly off to Gavin here. He's in the hot seat for giving a team's update for the women's team. You're gonna have to unmute. Sorry.
It's been a while since I've been on a Zoom meeting, fortunately. Yeah, good to see a few faces on here. Update on the women's team. We're in Europe, Austria, Italy, and Belgium. Got 19 days of skiing in over there. We've been home for just over a week now. Spent the week in the gym and are doing what we can to get on snow. We had 2 days on Cascade, which were actually quite good. And then today up at Nikiska, snowing heavily. Hopefully that clears up for some GS training tomorrow. We've started with eight girls this year. Unfortunately, Susanna tore her ACL on day 2 in Stelvio, which was a tough way to start the season. And the other 7 girls are healthy and making the most of every day we can. As you all know, the race season is about to kick off pretty quickly here. Got 2 girls heading down to Colorado for the early season NORAMs at Vale and Copper. So we're leaving with on the 10th. We've had some good cooperation with ACA and Quebec on the women's side, which has made preseason pretty helpful. Everyone's kind of working together, latching on, making best plans for the group as a whole, which is good for the country. That's where we've got the bulk of the girls this time around anyway, between Quebec and Alberta. And so Jim and the other 5 girls are going to be at Nikiska. We'll be there through the 19th. and then we'll be off to Panorama and got a bit of a circus to manage early season, the potential of 24 starts in 34 days or something like that. Obviously, we're not going to hit all of those, but we've got a lot of plan A, Bs, and Cs in place, and we'll do our best to manage the group and make the most of it.
Awesome. Can you give us 2 minutes on basic on what you're focusing on training wise with the girls over the summer?
Training wise, as trying to get as much volume as we can. Ski technique, as far as our technical skiing goes, spent, the majority of our camp in Europe, just really focusing on the weight transfer, making sure we're getting over the outside ski. And then, using our feet and trying to keep it simple. If you're stacked, get in the stack position, top of the turn, and then just trying to keep it in the boot as far as feedback goes. So we're not trying to overwhelm them with too much. Europe was challenging, I would say, but I think it's going to pay off when we get onto some man-made snow and some good snow that we're used to. Tough in the sense that, we were down to glacier ice and we were definitely on some challenging hills everywhere we went, aside from Stelvio, which was the only part of the camp where we were cut short a little bit. What else do you need, Josh? Are we waiting for Jonas to get home?
No, Jonas is on the call. Just great to have a little bit of what the girls are focusing on. And if anyone has any questions out there or anything, throw them this way. Any questions for Gavin? Perfect. Well, thank you for your time, Gavin. And
Thank you.
I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Jonas, how you doing? I just saw you called in, hopped on. You can give us a quick update on the men's side.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me, Josh? All good?
Yep, all good.
Cool. I'm not entirely sure what Gavin covered. I missed the first part of his spiel, but we did spend the majority of our Europe camp trying to kind of bounce off the two teams together and work together where we could. A lot of the stuff on snow was done separately, but we spent the same amount of time and worked together at the same venues. So I won't spend too much time covering that part. But for the most part, the Europe trip did go very well. It was very productive, certainly tiring for the guys, with volume and technical work being the main focus over there. With the condensed prep period we have before part of the crew heads down to Colorado here in a few days. Tried to make the most of every day, which I think the guys did a really good job. They stayed focused every day, which was great to see. And I think our big block in the gym we had this year, obviously being in the gym from May right until we left for Europe, it was a lot, but the guys were fired up and ready to go and translate those gains on snow. So it was good. As far as what the team's doing next, got, like I said, half the crew will be finishing up this week at Nikiska with our first day today. Then Caden and Logan and myself will be heading down to Colorado for 10 days for the first NORAMs of the year. The rest of the crew will be at Nikiska up until the 19th. And then everyone will be back together and heading out to Pano at that point for a little bit of a training block heading into those Canada Cup races. And then from there, we're a little bit split crew again as far as NORAM speed goes, and another training block for the other half of the group. And then Panorama for the big block of NORAMs and FIS races for everyone leading into Christmas. And then once we're in the new year, things again kind of spread apart, and we'll see what happens at that point. But I think Gavin mentioned it, a lot of plan A, Bs, and Cs in place, depending on how things go. So trying to stay fluid with whatever we need to do.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonas. One quick question for you. I'm gonna throw you a bit in the hot seat. What deficiencies are you seeing coming up with athletes that we have that that we can focus on better, technical wise?
That's a good question. I'd say probably the main deficiency that I would say we see across the board is a lot of following of the ski tips, I would say, that is happening. A lot of blocked skiing, lack of ankle mobility, just movement in general in the lower joints. So just working on that as far as body position stuff, just making sure things are always driving forward into the top of the new turn. And then just other than that, depth, seeing loopy lines and a lot of impatience at the end of the turn. Just not exiting the turn well, and therefore not being in a good position to start top of the turn in a strong position to work down the fall line and accelerate through the arc. So those are kind of the two biggest things that we see, and for sure the two biggest things that we worked on while we were in Europe.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Does anyone out there in the ether have any questions for Jonas? And just a reminder, if you see these guys on hill and you have questions, pull them aside, ask them, and say hello. Chad, go for it.
Yeah, Gavin, Jonas, to continue on with the deficiency kind of question that Josh asked you guys, how are you seeing our athletes athletically nowadays? Are they coming with the necessary athletic skills? And then on top of that, as we're running entry-level courses and DL courses and PL courses, and there's so many coaches in the province, and hopefully we're developing athletes that can be on the provincial team at some point. If there were like a couple key drills or a couple key messages you'd love younger coaches to take home and things to work with their athletes, what would it be?
I don't know if Gavin's still on the call, but I'm happy to try and answer those questions. As far as general athleticism, I would say as a province, we are not very strong in that realm. Just being at the provincial testing we did the weekend before we went to Europe, I think definitely as a province, especially in the younger ages, there's some work to be done, especially I'd say in the coordination, jumping skills side of things. I think a lot of athletes, just in watching them move, were very robotic and blocked, which again kind of is what we saw translate onto snow a little bit with some of the new or younger guys. Just that inability to move fluidly and efficiently through all the joints. So I'd say plyometrics is something that could translate well in dryland and onto snow through kind of all age groups. And then, sorry, Chad, what was your second question? You had kind of a secondary part.
Yeah, no problem, Jonas. Thanks. That was awesome. Thank you. The other part was like a key message, with the skiing side, the technical or the tactical, what are some key messages you would give to all of us coaches? Like what's one or two key drills or a couple things that would, man, I wish we had this in the province going on.
I think I'd say we have a lot of, I don't know, that's a good question. I would say balance and again, just a little bit of that coordination side of things. I think there's a lot of two-footed skiing that we're seeing. So working on drills that involve balance over the outside ski would be a pretty, I think, good place to start. and really trying to work off the ski, but not by off the ski, I should say, on the outside ski, not off of it and losing pressure, but working with the outside ski and then just staying patient with that through the end of the turn and not trying to rush anything or move off the ski at the end. So just one ski drills, and then the transition, something in the transition, a drill working from foot to foot and how to find that balance point in the transition.
And that actually, Josh, that's perfect. And Chad, that ties right back into when Sasha was talking about the active transition. That is what's being referred to there as actively moving from one ski to another through the transition, balance and motion. So that's perfect. Sorry to jump in there. Keep going if you had any more.
No, I think that's a good place to start. You know, I think everyone in this province is very experienced as coaching staff. I think we're very lucky as a province to have the expertise and years of experience we do have. And I think, you know, as far as the one or two things that we kind of see consistently, that would be all I would say. And I think, yeah, if we can work on some of that, starting at younger age groups all the way through, I think that would be great.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonas. I'll chime in here for Todd. The volumes of gates and ratios of free skis to drills that we did over in Europe was accelerated, basically return to snow. So, and that has to be in mind as we didn't have a middle of the summer middle camp. So we were roughly 80-20 within session, I should say. And that is within the session on snow. And then, well, during the morning session, I should say. And then we also did TFS in the afternoon on rotating days. So that would bring the total ratio on snow probably to 30-70 to 65-35, roughly somewhere in there. And as we moved through the camp, that changed as well, in that it moved from more of technical free skiing, more of drills, and that to more of a focus on performance in the environment to basically an accelerated return to race, basically. Because some of these athletes, as you know, as Jonas and Gavin both mentioned, a few of them are going to NORAMs immediately. And so there was a adjustment through the camp for that. Hopefully that answers that. If you have anything more, thank you, Jonas, for that. And if there's any more questions, send them our way. If not, I'll hand it over to Shane Spence, the head of ski cross, and give us a ski cross update, Shane.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you everybody for being here today or listening in. It's ski cross is definitely a new fun experience for myself, and I'm starting with a team as of September 1, which was our kickoff to the season, and we headed off to Europe. We did the same as the Alpine. We started out at Stelvio with some technical free skiing, just a very quick return to snow. Moved over to Hintertux, where we got into some gate environments and really focused on improving the Alpine ski skills. And then we headed over to Saas-Fee to get on the World Cup track with the national teams to get time on track. And throughout the whole focus was to improve the Alpine skills, to find those hundreds of seconds, tenths of seconds, to keep improving our speed on the course, as well as bring in some more of the tactical elements of ski cross. That's more the passes, the presses, looking at the difference of line between a winning line, a chase line, a pass line, and a lot of how do we mentally shift the focus into looking for those gains and those passing opportunities on a World Cup track with World Cup teams. And the benefit of being in Saas-Fee was that we were able to be on the track with the Canadian national team, the Swiss national team, French, Austrian, and Swedish teams, which for the Alberta team to get into that environment at such an early stage in the game is definitely going to put us ahead leaps and bounds throughout the year. Moving forward, we do have the benefit of a wonderful World Cup track permanent training environment at Nikiska. So our primary focus will be utilizing that track, utilizing the start locations to gain those tenths of seconds, hundreds of seconds out of the start, and also use that World Cup track permanent training environment to actually help elevate our athletes throughout the season. The focus, we're targeting a few Europa Cups and the main NORAM circuit just to get our athletes into that mix, getting them noticed by the national team and stepping them up to that higher level. With that said, we also will be looking at the up and comers through some of the camps throughout the season, and also at the end of the season at the spring camp to start looking towards the next year's team. In terms of ski cross technique and tactics and focus that some of you younger coaches could be taking in to your training environments and your free skiing, it's getting them comfortable with the air, looking and understanding a jump, looking at a line on how it can be adapted and changed, even in the standard gate course, to understand the difference between a high line, a late line, an early line, a deep line, just getting them to understand those mental challenges and adaptions will really help anybody who is looking to come to ski cross. And from my background, going from Alpine to ski cross, the training elements we're doing in ski cross can have huge benefit to Alpine, especially the GS and Super G Alpine skills. By bringing those and elevating those helps an athlete bring those skills into ski cross in the future.
Thanks, Shane. I was going to ask you can you share a little bit more on your experience of you have a foot in both worlds now from Alpine to ski cross, and can you share a little bit more of those skills in regards to terrain and that are crossover that we can look at young ages and make fun, that can benefit the athlete as a whole, irregardless of the path they choose?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed is that with ski cross, it's a lot of absorption, compression, of jumping, of doubling, of understanding how to utilize terrain. So for the younger coaches, getting them to free ski and getting them to ski moguls, getting them to ski on terrain with rolling features, getting them into even flatter terrain and understanding how the ski can accelerate and generate speed on the flats. Utilizing terrain in your sets with side hills and followays and setting a little more interesting over breakovers where it's a little more hidden, that gate below. Setting brushes in a mogul course, or not a mogul course, but a mogul run, and getting the athletes to ski a line through the bumps where they're absorbing the upslope and pressing the downslope of a mogul. Learning how to double over a mogul would be another really good skill to have, and would also help with Alpine, because if on rougher courses or rougher terrain, it gives that athlete that ability to look ahead and go, okay, here's an issue where I need to press and absorb the backside. Here's where I can generate speed. And then also doing fun little drills to get them to look ahead. Not like we see that as with Alpine, that a lot of the athletes focus on just 1 or 2 gates ahead, but getting them to look 4 or 5 gates ahead, look down a corridor, look where there's a delay coming up and look past that delay. The biggest thing we see in ski cross is that athletes fixate on the feature that's coming up and not how to move through that feature and deal with the track after that feature. So by bringing those look ahead skills into a GS, say, where you've got a nice corridor, a delay, and then another corridor, getting that athlete to understand to look past that delay into the next corridor, because those are skills that are going to help in the Alpine and also help if they do decide to look over to ski cross. Did
Awesome.
that answer your question, Josh?
Yeah, thank you so much, Shane. If there's any questions for Shane or ski cross in general, shoot them in the chat or speak up here. All right, we'll move forward. Okay, we're getting through this, and I'm just gonna thank you, Shane. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, and thank you everybody for joining.
Yeah, I'm gonna give a couple of updates from my desk. I know Pat talked a little bit about COVID policies and that, and so I hope everyone understands what's happening this year. With our policy, it is at races at U14 and above, it's either double vaccinated or a negative test. The ROCs will organize that, and it's just an attestation form. So it's just a saying, yes, I have been double vaccinated, or yes, I have a negative test. And that is, we're not keeping any health data. I want to make sure that that's first and foremost. So it's just an attestation form. Beyond that, it will be the most stringent standard at the location that we're at. So if every resort has a little bit of a different policy, a lot of them are moving to just being double vaxxed, but some aren't. So it will be the most stringent standard at the location. So if Lake Louise is requiring double vaccination, if you go to Lake Louise for a race or an event, you will need to meet their standards, which are above Alberta Alpine standards, which are above AHS standards, just so you know, just so we're clear on that. Couple updates. Well, one, coach education, Chad, I want to give Chad a big thank you. And Chad and I have been tag teaming a bit, with Chad doing more, and it will slowly, over this, we talked about it, over this next 2 weeks, we'll transition to, I'll be manage that full-time behind the scenes. So I don't know, Chad, if you wanted to talk to anything on that, or if you just want to let me go.
There we go. Howdy. Just let you go, really. You know what? I've really enjoyed this role. Last year it was a learning experience and got at it. And yeah, this year you and I have been tag teaming it, and it's time for me to bow out. And thank you so much. I really gotta say, with Josh taking over the role of program director, the provinces, it's going to be awesome. So thanks a lot.
Oh, thanks for that, Chad. Still yet to be proved. Don't put that golden stamp there yet. But just to give you all an update there, we're building out those courses on Snow Ridge right now, and they will slowly be populated onto the Alberta Alpine calendar and the Snow Ridge calendar as well to find them. So there's the November ones are up, December are coming up, and then throughout the season are being built out more now currently. So those should be up in the next 2 weeks to give you guys an idea on coaches ed. Then beyond that, a couple changes to the nitty gritty of events and what we're doing. There's a new U12 start order, just so everyone knows. U12 start order will now be a random by team start. And the idea behind this within our U12 coaches working group is, number one, if we had any issues with COVID, we'll keep athletes within their teams. And number two, this will allow teams to come to the start, get everyone ready, go through their team, and then you could possibly take your team and go free ski and have more access to more time on snow at a race. So those were the two justifying factors behind that change. U14 start order as well, just for the first 2 series of the year, because we don't have any national points for those 2 years. So they will be a randomized draw for the first day, first race. Then that will be flipped for the second race, first day, And then off of those results, a ranking list will be created. And then so athletes can run in their cohorts where they're close to athletically wise for the second day, first race. And then that will be flipped again for the second day, second race. And that is just for the first slalom and first GS of the year. So, you know, beyond that, there's a little update on U12 setting guidelines. So we will not, how many runs for U12 races? That's up to Mark. That's a good question. Individual event, and it's up to the organizer if we want to run multiple runs. So it can be fluid. There's nothing has changed on that. But coming to the actual setting, no outside poles or downhill poles on the combinations. So a flush or a hairpin does not need that outside down the hill gate. That sometimes becomes confusing at that age, irregardless of gate type use. And so you guys know, so you can plan for the season. It's proposed and that looking into that the final slalom will be tall poles for the year for U12s. So that gives a progression throughout the years, throughout the year to go stubbies, to go panels, and then move into, and by tall pole, I mean a 60-inch OTS, which is a full gate, but the shorter ones, the training gates. So those are a few things to keep on your agenda list so you know. For 999 FIS athletes, it's the FIS procedure still stands right now. So it's randomized 999 draw on that. And that's FIS rules. That hasn't changed, Pete, just so you know.
So even first and second year athletes, they're all seated in the same seed.
Yeah, they're still seated in the same seed. Yeah. Beyond that, I just want to open this up to questions. That's great points. Thank you for dropping questions in this chat. We're getting close to the end. We had one more presenter that wasn't able to make it today due to a family emergency. So we'll wrap up here pretty quickly. If anyone has any questions for me regarding anything, drop them now. Or you're always welcome to email, to text, or to call. I'm really good. Yes, so the Canyon race in January, it is on the Alberta Alpine calendar. I have to look it up because it's not right in front of me. So, but it is decided and it is on the calendar. Anything else? You guys are a quiet group.
Hey, Josh.
Yep.
Can I just say a couple of things about coach licensing real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
If we got a few minutes.
Go
Can I share my screen by any chance?
I'll make you a presenter right now.
That'll take 5 minutes. I hope. I'll talk fast.
Give me just one moment, Chad. There you go. You should be co-host and now you should be able to share your screen.
Woohoo! Thanks, man. Hey, before I share, I just want to touch on a couple things. Just really quickly, last year, by December, just before the licensing deadline of January 31st, we had about 200 coaches that weren't licensed yet, rolling into that annual renewal. And then when we sent an email out, there was a huge flurry. So I'm just going to show a couple of websites real quick. And I really, really encourage all of you and also to pass it on to everybody. You know, there's 100 people on this meeting, and I know there's more coaches in the province. Pass it on, and I hope people get comfortable with this stuff. Here we go. That's me. There we go. We'll share that. That's my email. Okay. We can see this? Yep, cool. Just really quickly on ltad.alpinecanada.org, I really, really encourage people to get used to this website and use it. Under coaches, look at the development pathway and look at the policies. Everything you need to know is kind of under those two things. There are a lot of questions that roll in that are on this website. So please, especially with, you know, the pathway. I promise to be faster if my internet's fast. With the pathway, with coach in training, what's needed with entry level, what's needed for DL and PL. If you want to be a coach learning facilitator, if you want to be a coach mentor and evaluator, it's all right here. And under each one of these tabs, it explains exactly what you need and how to do it. So that's number one. I feel like a lot of people aren't aware of this website or the resources that are there. Also under here as well as the reference material. Jenny's constantly updating the reference material. There are recorded webinars. If you guys are having a hard time with SnowReg, renewing your membership, there's YouTube videos. We also put it on the inside track. There's YouTube videos on how to do it. So please, the next website, everyone should be aware of coach.ca, and specifically in your locker, knowing your profile and your certification. And a lot of people are always asking, well, what do I have or what don't I have or what do I need to do next? And Jenny brought up a really interesting thing last week that I think we should touch on. Underneath, you know, your transcript, there's these cool little eyes, and they actually, when you click on them, they tell you exactly the things you've done or what you need to do for each one of those levels. So that's something to take note of. And lastly, on the NCCP website, if you're looking at things that you need to do and they're not on e-learning, I hope a lot of people are starting to become aware of albertasport.ca. On the coaching calendar, these are all the courses that are online, that are NCCP courses in our province that are being offered at any time. And so between these three websites, I hope all of you start to bookmark this stuff. It really starts to consolidate things. Remember that an EL trained coach needs 2 education credits and 1 risk management credit a year, and every other level needs 4 education credits and 1 risk management credit, which I believe a lot of people are getting from attending today. That's all I have. We're good?
Great. Thanks for that, Chad. Yeah. And yeah, everyone gets credit for today. So are there any more? Sorry, I'm looking through the chat here to make sure I haven't missed anything. So if you have any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. I get bogged down a little bit in email personally from my side of things, but a text gets answered very quickly. And I try to pick up the phone as long as I'm not on another call. But I thank everyone for being here today. How do we access the ACA e-learning modules? Do you have that up, Chad? So Matt,
Sorry, what's that?
how do we access the ACA e-learning modules?
Oh, ACA e-learning modules. There we go. Jenny normally puts them on SnowReg because everything that we do for coaches education, in order to gain credit, we have to log through SnowReg. So any webinars that are being hosted by ACA are posted on SnowReg, and you have to register yourself. And then after that, they are videoing or recording their webinars. And so under the coach reference material, there's a tab that says recorded webinars, and you can go down into that and you can watch previous webinars if you would like.
Awesome. Thank you for that coverage on that. And just because you have the screen up, it's perfect. Any other questions? I saw Matt. I had one about credits for this event. I have you all marked down under attendance, so you're all set. So you are marked down. Yes, no problem there. And thank you very much. If there's any other questions, throw them out there, but I appreciate all your time, your effort, and everything you do for the athletes in the province. They are working, Mark, to give you an idea, they're working on, Jenny was talking about doing a little quiz or something for each recorded webinar, so you could get credit for it. That's more to come from her desk. This one, Claudio, should be 4 and 1. So 4 education and 1 safety. So it should satisfy your yearly requirement. Oh, perfect. I'm gonna sign off then. I hope everyone has a good evening. Ended a little bit early, but thank you for your time again. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Josh.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.